Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Welcome. This is another Flip the Script episode because someone else will be interviewing me. That someone else is Matthew Scura from Edge of Cinema. I was on his podcast, Stories from the Top. This is the third and final episode in the series. This episode, we're going to talk about how you can be a great public speaker. Let's dive in.
We are back with Matt Zaun for our final episode of this series where we're going to talk about public speaking and how to engage an audience. Matt, once again, thanks for coming on the show. To start out, what is your personal approach to public speaking?
All right, so there are many. You ready to dive in? You ready for this?
Let's go.
So there's a lot that I want people to recognize. And for those of you listening to this podcast, there's still a lot that you can get out of it. You don't need to see this. You could listen as well. Your speech begins before you step up and utter anything out of your mouth. So this is really important. If you are going into any kind of event, so whether this is a staff meeting, whether this is a sales meeting, it's a networking event, your talk begins before that. People are looking at you. How are you dressed? How do you carry yourself? Very important. One of the things I always do is I try to shake every single hand in a room before I speak. So when I'm doing a workshop and there's 50 people in the room, you better believe I'm shaking every single one of those hands before that workshop begins. If I'm speaking at a conference and there's 250 people in the room and I don't have time to shake every hand, I'll do like zones where I'll go to certain parts of the room and I'll shake, 20 hands in that zone. It's really good to get the audience on your side, to build that rapport, to have that connection before you get up and speak. Once you get up and you speak, a really powerful way to start is to pause. So one of the things I always do is I pause and I look out at the audience and I just pause for a good second or two. It really exudes confidence and people are thinking, I wonder what he's going to say. What are the first words that are going to come out of his mouth? You have the audience in the palm of your hand. Now, when you speak, it needs to be something that grabs their attention immediately. So sometimes I'll start with a really powerful question. Sometimes I'll jump right in the middle of a story and then I'll backtrack, almost like a really good movie that you watch where the first thing is boom, you're in the story and then it kind of backtracks. It's a very powerful way to start and kick it off. So let's just start there. That's the start of it. So that's what I would say from the start.
So what do you think are some of the common problems people fall into when they're public speaking who may not have the skill set that you do?
They're focused too much on themselves. Okay, they're focused on negative potential outcomes, not the task at hand. This is so important to recognize. And this is really the hang up of a lot of people that are starting their public speaking journey. The negative potential outcome is, how will I look? Am I offending anyone? Am I looking stupid? Am I going to remember everything that I want to say? That's the negative potential outcome. Focusing on the task at hand is something you and I have done since we were little kids. It's just literally speaking. So if you think of great athletes, right? So one of the greatest athletes that's very recognizable that everyone in this podcast, everyone listening to this podcast can relate to is Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan, as many people listening know, performed under some pretty intense pressure. And he was asked once, how are you able to stay so calm, cool, and collected under such intense pressure? And his response was, I don't think about the outcome, I think about the task. He wasn't thinking about tens of thousands of eyeballs in those stands looking at him. He wasn't thinking about what sports journalists would negatively write if he missed that basket. He wasn't thinking about endorsements being pulled. He was thinking about the task at hand, which for him, when he was younger, It's putting a ball into a basket. So I think a lot of times we hype ourselves up thinking about all the negative potential outcomes, and we're choking off our ability to connect, focusing on that. So that is the most important element from a nerves perspective. We actually there needs to be a major perspective shift. We're not nervous, we're excited. You'll never hear an Olympic athlete say that they're nervous before an event. They'll say, I'm excited. There's a reason for that. We need to really understand we're excited. We're not nervous. Now, that perspective shift will help a lot of people recognizing, okay, so if you have those butterflies in your stomach, good. Lean into them with that excitement piece.
Okay. So aside from preparation and having an actual quality story and presentation you're putting together, what is, you think, some good tips to keep an audience engaged throughout your presentation?
Great. Well, there's a ton of things we could talk about. The immediate thing that jumps out at me is, let's talk about some almost mechanics, if you will, because I think it'll be helpful. So first is eye contact is huge, and most people do it wrong. Okay, most people do it wrong. So I want everyone to imagine listening to this episode. If you're in a room full of 50 people, regarding eye contact, the way it works is when you're talking to someone. So I'm looking at an object in your studio right now. So when I'm looking at that person, now I'm looking at another person because my sentence dropped off. And then I'm looking at another person. It's more intentional. A lot of people just bounce their eyes around. They aimlessly bounce their eyes. That's not proper eye contact. It's focusing in on looking at that person. Now I pause. Now I'm going to look at another person. You don't want to look at someone too long because that fight or flight mechanism pops into their head where they feel weird. You're like staring them down. You don't do that, right? And you don't bounce your eyes.
I hate when people do that.
For sure. So that's one thing, having really, really good eye contact. Also, you can vicariously yell at people through someone else. So when I'm doing, we've talked about storytelling. When I'm sharing a story and I'm speaking through the main character, I can literally yell at the audience through that character. So there's a story that I shared in a lot of my workshops and keynotes regarding my grandfather. I'm literally yelling at the audience, but it's through my grandfather. So my voice fluctuation is really high. It's a great way to grab attention, pull them in. Another thing is body language is huge, right? So are your palms out more than the back of your hand? A lot of leaders, when they have a slide deck, they have the clicker, right? So they're just showing the back of their hand. Hands are so powerful when it comes to body language. The way we position our body is really important. And you're using it as a staging type perspective, how the stage is, right? And so those are a few things that are really very, very, when done with intention, can have a lot of power.
Awesome. How would someone who wants to increase their speaking skills, what's some good ways for them to practice that and develop these skills?
So there's a lot of opportunities in a lot of cities across the country. So I would recommend resources like Toastmasters is a great way to get up, have some mistakes. There's a lot of improv comedy outfits across the U.S. So Comedy Sports is one that I highly respect. There's chapters all around the country, so people can go do a couple classes when it comes to improv. It gets you on stage. It gets bright lights in your face. People are asking you questions. You're learning more of the performance element of speaking. There's open mic nights with a lot of places. There's story slams across the country, so people can get up. They can give a 5-minute talk. So I would look in those ways. Also, there's churches. There's Chamber of Commerce events. There's a lot of events that even if someone just takes a minute or two to stand up and introduce themselves, they're starting the process of being in front of people.
What is your thoughts on the digital speech where maybe you're presenting to a bunch of people on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, or you're recording some kind of a webinar type of thing? How would someone change up some of your public speaking strategies if they're presenting digitally, even if it's just to a team of coworkers or management?
I love this question. All right. So I like this question because we are pretty far in to a lot of people doing virtual meetings, right? There's a lot of people listening that have done a lot of virtual meetings. I would really challenge everyone listening, are you doing them properly? So here's a few quick tips when it comes to if we're talking about Zoom or a Teams virtual capacity, is ask yourself this question. if you got up to present to your team at your company, would you get up seated or would you be standing? Most people would say they would be standing. They would go up in front and they would talk about numbers. They might share some stories, but they're doing it standing. There are a lot of times, even though it's a virtual meeting, where you should be standing to present. We have a better place when it comes to power with our communication. We can do a lot more when it comes to viewing that screen, that square, almost like that is the way to capture people's attention. So for those of you that are might be able to see me, like I'm using hand gestures, right? So we can go further away, we can go closer. There's ways that we can utilize our body when it comes to positioning us to get more of that engagement. So that's really important. So one of the things that I do when I'm doing virtual events, I have a sit-stand desk. I'm always standing when I'm doing those kind of talks. So that's really important. Another thing is eye contact. Okay, you're looking at that one hole, that camera. Most people, are you properly looking at the camera? There's a lot of people that are looking at the person. Well, to do that, you're not looking at the camera. You're not giving them proper eye contact. So I think those are some things that people can do to enhance. Also, hands are really important. How are you using your hands on a virtual platform?
Have you ever heard of those or seen those like screen mounted cameras where you can have a camera like centered on the person, so you can actually kind of look at them? Because I know sometimes it's weird staring like up at the camera if it's like in the top of a bigger screen or above there.
You could put like a smiley face right next to the camera, just so it gives you an idea to smile, to recognize like there's a human at the end of that camera. And I think that's important. It is kind of weird just looking at the camera and not at the screen. It's definitely a learned skill for sure.
You lose that like reaction. You can't really analyze their reactions to what you're saying if you can't see them. So,
well, it's funny because if done properly with two people on a virtual call, both of them are not looking at each other because they're both looking at the camera. So it's just we're getting on a call and we're just going to stare at a camera.
It's sad since COVID. Like we love the in-person meeting when we're first talking to someone about possibly working together. We used to love, let's go in, let's see what your setup looks like. Let's talk about your ideas. We'll put together some kind of a proposal or treatment. Now, even when someone's local, it's like, let's have a video call to start out with. So it's a tool you need to have in your belt to be able to present in person and digital. And often digital is the gatekeeper to that physical meeting.
Sure.
So it's important skill. So I really appreciate you.
And this is really important because one of the questions you asked me was about the branding piece. How are people's backgrounds set up?
That's a good.
This is huge, right? This is amazing from a branding perspective. So what do you have behind you that's going to teach someone, especially if they've never met you before? What's it going to teach them about you? A lot of people have like a blurred out background. So when they move, their head looks weird. Some people have books behind them that don't relate to their clients or their prospects. That's a problem. I've seen pictures behind people of movies that I question, is that what your clients are into? Not anything bad, but just is it truly connecting with your clients? So something as simple as what's the kind of background that you have? It's really important.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on like the face filters where it's like makes you look younger? Not like the cartoony ones, but it's like they'll soften their face, take wrinkles out, like.
I'm not a fan because if the person's doing that, I would question, are they authentic when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to sharing a message in other aspects of their life?
Yeah. And while we're on the topic, I did a poll on LinkedIn a while ago, but there's always a weird moment when you get into a group meeting. Say there's like 4 or 5 people in this call and one has a camera on, 2 don't, or you come in with your camera on, no one else has a camera on. Do you keep your camera on and hold the confidence? I don't care if they don't see me or not, or do you turn it off and just go into a voice call only?
Personally, I always have my camera on.
Yeah, I always do too. I think it's weird when, like, what's the point of a video call if you can't see the people you're talking to?
Now, I've been on a call where people are driving, and I would hope that they don't have their camera on. They're just listening to me. But again, they still could be watching me at times. So I'm still focused on how is my body language coming through that screen?
Yeah, I see it as it's another dimension for you to present your authenticity by letting them see you, even if you can't see them. That doesn't really matter. It's really how you're presenting yourself. So.
Sure. And the storytelling aspect is, the storytelling affects so many aspects of our life, but what is the story being shared even through that virtual piece? Again, the background is really important. In addition, the face of the person. You had mentioned, different software pieces that, tweak that. Pictures are important. If you have a profile picture that's 15 years old and then someone gets on a Zoom call with you and their face looks completely different, my immediate response is, wow, is this the same person? I'm not saying that it completely destroys trust, but when everyone talks about how important trust is, don't you want to be as authentic as you can be? Not authentic in like a really dressed down type way. It's perhaps, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, are you immediately trustworthy based on that perspective? Because that happens all the time where I'll hop on a call and I'm like, that person doesn't even look close to the pictures that they have out in the world. So now I'm thinking, what else is weird about this person?
Yeah. Well, and on the other side, if they were the one possibly hiring someone and their picture is totally different, it's just a distraction. Really.
Sure.
It's like, what is this disparagement from the picture to what you actually are? It gives them something to think about besides what you're talking about.
For sure.
We recommend getting fresh headshots as often as possible at Edge of Cinema. So, Matt, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been amazing to talk to you. You have so much knowledge. We really appreciate it. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to learn more about you and check out your podcast, Stories with Traction?
For sure. They can go to my website, storieswithtraction.com. They can find out all my information there.
And follow Matt on LinkedIn. He's telling stories every day on there.
For sure. Thanks for your time.
Of course, Matt. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.